In January of 897, the Vatican held a trial that defied both divine and human law. On the highest throne sat the defendant, dressed in the finest papal vestments. There was just one problem. He had been dead for 9 months. This is the story of the Cadaver Synod, the night a pope put a ghost on trial. Inside the great basilica of San Giovanni in Laterano, the stench was unbearable. The defendant, Pope Formosus, sat slumped on the throne, clutching the scepter of God's representative on earth. His skin was a translucent grey, his body was bloated with the gases of decay, and the smell in the courtroom was so foul that even the most hardened soldiers turned their heads in disgust. Yet for the presiding judge, Pope Stephen VI, death was no excuse for missing a trial. But to understand why a sitting pope would order his guards to dig up a rotting corpse, you have to understand the blood-soaked chaos of 9th century Rome. This wasn't a city of saints, it was a city of warlords. The papacy had become a blood-soaked trophy passed between rival families. The Spoleto family, the power players of the day, felt betrayed by the late Pope Formosus. He had supported their rivals and crowned a barbarian king as emperor. To the Spoletos, Formosus wasn't just a bad leader, he was a traitor whose very legacy needed to be erased from existence. But you can't erase a pope's legacy while his decrees are still legal. To undo his laws, they had to prove he was never a pope to begin with. Under the cover of night, Stephen VI ordered his guards to St. Peter's Basilica. They broke the seal on Formosus's tomb, dragged the rotting remains out of the cold marble, and began a grotesque transformation. They dressed the corpse in the sacred robes of the papacy, propped his head up, and tied him to a throne in the courtroom. The trial was a fever dream. Pope Stephen VI didn't just read charges, he screamed at the body.
By what right, Formosus, did you illegally seize the papacy? Answer me! You have desecrated the Holy See.
Why did you, in your ambition, usurp the universal Roman See? He bellowed. Because dead men don't talk, Stephen appointed a teenage deacon to stand behind the corpse and answer for it. Imagine this young man, trembling in the shadows, whispering a defense, while the man he was representing literally fell apart in front of him. Nature itself seemed revolted. At the height of the shouting, a massive earthquake struck Rome. The walls of the Lateran Basilica groaned and began to crack. To the superstitious Romans, it was the voice of God. But Stephen VI was too blinded by rage to listen. The verdict was predetermined. Guilty. The Synod declared Formosus an unpope. Every act he had ever performed, every priest he had ever ordained, and every blessing he had ever given was declared null and void. But a legal verdict wasn't enough for Stephen. He wanted a public execution. First, they stripped him. They tore the sacred vestments from his rotting flesh, replacing them with the rags of a commoner. Then they performed a ritual mutilation. They chopped off the 3 fingers of his right hand, the fingers he had used to give the papal blessing. Finally, the body was dragged through the streets of Rome by a mob and hurled into the Tiber River. For Stephen VI, the nightmare was over. But for the people of Rome, it was just beginning. The river didn't keep the secret. Formosus's body washed up on the banks where a humble monk recovered it. Stories began to spread of the corpse pope performing miracles from the water. The Roman people, disgusted by Stephen's madness, eventually rose up. They stripped Stephen of his power, threw him in a dungeon, and strangled him to death. Today, Formosus lies back in St. Peter's, his papacy restored. But the memory of the Cadaver Synod remains, a reminder that in the Imperium of Dust, not even the grave is a sanctuary from the politics of man. I'm your host for Imperium of Dust. If you enjoyed this descent into the dark corners of history, subscribe for more stories of the strange and the forgotten.